Some people are born to create. They see the world not just for what it is, but for what it could be, brushed onto a canvas. Sarah Jenkins was one of those people. In the small, mountain-nestled town of Silver Creek, Colorado, her studio was a sanctuary of light and color. The air inside always carried the distinct, sharp scent of turpentine and oil paints, a fragrance of creation. Sunlight, crisp and pure at this altitude, would pour through the large north-facing window, illuminating the swirling galaxies of dust motes and falling upon canvases that held captured moments of time. The violent magenta of a mountain sunset, the deep, knowing green of an ancient pine forest, the placid blue of a hidden alpine lake. Sarah, at 28, was more than just a painter. She was a vibrant part of the town's own landscape. You could find her most mornings at the Daily Grind Cafe, her laughter echoing off the old brick walls, her bright, inquisitive eyes charming the weary barista into a smile. She had a way of making people feel seen, of making a mundane Tuesday morning feel like the start of an adventure. Her friends remember her energy, a relentless, joyful force. They recall afternoons spent hiking, where Sarah would suddenly stop, silenced by the way the light filtered through the aspen leaves, her mind already mixing the perfect shade of gold in her head. She was a daughter, a friend, an artist on the cusp of truly finding her voice, her work just beginning to gain recognition beyond the local galleries. The world was her subject, and she was painting a beautiful life. October 14th, 2021 dawned with the kind of crystalline beauty that makes mountain towns famous. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the distant promise of winter snow. It was a perfect day for inspiration. We know that Sarah started her day at the Daily Grind, the steam from her coffee cup fogging the chill air. We know she was in high spirits, talking to the barista about a new trail she wanted to explore, a new perspective she wanted to capture. This wasn't just another hike. For an artist like Sarah, it was a pilgrimage. She was heading for the Whispering Pines Trail, a remote path known for its breathtaking vistas and its profound silence. As her small sedan crunched over the gravel of the mountain roads, the world outside her window was a symphony of autumn. The aspens were electric yellow, a stark, brilliant contrast to the stoic dark greens of the pines and the deep, impossible blue of the Colorado sky. It was the kind of day that felt infinite, a day brimming with possibility, a day that held no hint of the darkness that was to come. It was just a girl, a car, a cup of coffee, and a mountain waiting to be painted. A final, perfect, ordinary morning. 2 days can feel like an eternity when a loved one is missing. For Sarah's father, the 48 hours since he'd last heard from his daughter had stretched into a taut wire of anxiety. When his calls went unanswered, a familiar paternal worry slowly curdled into something colder, sharper. He drove to her studio, finding it empty, the scent of paint hanging in the still air, a half-finished canvas on the easel like a paused conversation. Then he drove the route she'd mentioned, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, scanning the turnouts and trailheads. He found her car at the entrance to the Whispering Pines Trail. The landing was damp and deserted, shrouded in a thin, chilly mist that clung to the trees. The car was parked at a slightly odd angle, as if left in a hurry. A profound sense of wrongness settled over him. Peering through the driver's side window, his breath fogging the glass, he saw her life on pause. Her worn backpack was on the passenger seat. A half-full cup of coffee from the Daily Grind sat in the center console, a silent testament to her last ordinary moments. But her hiking boots were gone. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. He called 911, his voice tight, strained, the word missing catching in his throat. When the first sheriff's deputies arrived, their calm professionalism was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. They moved with a practiced slowness, their voices low as they surveyed the scene. To them, it was a car at a trailhead. But to a father's intuition, standing at the edge of those silent, waiting woods, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The search for Sarah Jenkins began with a hopeful urgency that would soon fade. The Whispering Pines Trail, once a place of quiet beauty, was transformed into a stage for a drama of desperation. The crisp air was filled with the anxious, sharp barks of search and rescue dogs, their noses to the ground, pulling their handlers through the dense underbrush. Teams of volunteers, neighbors, and friends, their faces etched with worry, fanned out in grid patterns, their bright orange vests like tiny, flickering flames against the immense, indifferent green of the national forest. Their calls of Sarah were swallowed by the vastness, the sound absorbed by the thick trunks of ponderosa pines and the soft, damp carpet of needles on the forest floor. Helicopters beat the air overhead, their rotors a rhythmic, thudding heartbeat in the sky. The observers inside scanning the endless canopy for any sign of color that didn't belong, any hint of a person in a place they shouldn't be. For Sarah's parents, the search was a unique form of torture. They existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting by the phone, their home filled with the funereal scent of well-meaning casseroles brought by neighbors. Every rustle of leaves, every crackle of the police scanner was a potential harbinger of news, good or bad. They no longer knew which to pray for. They just wanted an answer. But the trail remained silent. The woods kept their secrets. And as the days turned into a week, the hope that had once burned so brightly began to feel like a dying ember in the cold, encroaching darkness. In the fluorescent-lit, coffee-stained offices of the Silver Creek Sheriff's Department, the investigation was becoming a frustrating exercise in chasing ghosts. Detectives built a timeline of Sarah's last known hours, a fragile chain of ordinary moments that led to an extraordinary void. They interviewed everyone in her orbit, searching for a crack in the smooth facade of her life, any hint of discord that might explain her disappearance. Her ex-boyfriend was questioned, his nervousness and grief palpable as he recounted their amicable breakup weeks earlier. Friends wept as they shared their last conversations with her, their memories now precious, painful relics. They spoke of her infectious optimism, her passion for her art, her excitement about future projects. No one could recall a single shadow, a single threat or worry that darkened her world. Detectives pored over her financials and digital footprints, finding nothing amiss. Her bank accounts were untouched. Her last text messages were mundane exchanges about art supplies and dinner plans. It was as if she had simply evaporated. For the investigators, each interview that ended in a tearful shrug, each lead that dissolved into a dead end, added to a growing sense of frustration. They were professionals trained to find patterns in chaos, but Sarah's case was a blank canvas. There was no sign of a struggle at her car, no credible witnesses, no note, no motive, just a profound and terrifying absence. Time is the cruelest element in a missing person case. In the beginning, there is adrenaline, a flurry of activity, the bright glare of media attention. But then, inevitably, it begins to fade. For the family of Sarah Jenkins, the world moved on, others remained frozen on October 14, 2021. The seasons turned over Silver Creek. The vibrant yellows of the aspens where Sarah last walked gave way to the deep, heavy snows of winter, which then melted into the muddy greens of spring. The missing posters, once stark and new, began to curl at the edges, their images of Sarah's smiling face bleached by the relentless mountain sun, her picture slowly fading like a photograph left out in the rain. For her parents, life became a series of painful milestones. Her birthday passed, a day of hollow silence instead of celebration. Holidays were marked by the empty chair at the table. The initial flood of calls and texts from concerned friends dwindled to a trickle. The case, once the lead story on the local news, was relegated to a brief mention on the anniversary of her disappearance. It had become what every family fears: a cold case, a box of files on a dusty shelf, a silent testament to a life interrupted, a mystery the world had stopped trying to solve. But for a parent, a case is never cold. Their hope, though battered and bruised, refused to die, a stubborn, flickering flame in the long, dark night of not knowing. Cold case files are stored in rooms that smell of old paper and forgotten stories. They are monuments to failure, to questions left unanswered. In late 2024, nearly 3 years after Sarah Jenkins vanished, a veteran detective named Frank Miller pulled her case file from one of those shelves. Miller was nearing retirement, a man with a quiet, dogged persistence and a deep-seated belief that no case was ever truly hopeless. Under the flickering fluorescent lights of the county's evidence storage annex, he spread the contents of the box across a wide metal table. Crime scene photos of the lonely sedan, transcripts of interviews filled with grief and confusion, maps of the fruitless search area. It was a story with no ending. But technology had evolved in those 3 years. Forensic data analysis, once a blunt instrument, had become a scalpel. Miller's attention wasn't on the physical evidence, which had yielded nothing, but on the invisible world of digital signals. He sent Sarah's phone records and the tower data from the area around the Whispering Pines Trail on the day she disappeared to a specialized digital forensics unit. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew that in the silence of the woods, a cell phone tower had been a silent witness. In a darkened room, illuminated only by the glow of oversized monitors, a young analyst began the painstaking work of rebuilding the digital. Ghost of October 14, 2021. The process was tedious, like assembling a million-piece puzzle. He mapped every single device that had connected to the remote cell tower that serviced the Whispering Pines trailhead during the window of Sarah's disappearance. The data was a sea of anonymous numbers, the digital chatter of 100 different lives. But then, using a new mapping software, he isolated Sarah's phone. He watched its signal arrive at the trailhead and then go silent. The official story. But Detective Miller had asked him to look for anomalies, for anything out of place. So the analyst widened the net, looking for other devices that had been in that same isolated area at that same time that didn't belong to known searchers or law enforcement. And then he found it, a single-second signal, a ghost in the machine, a prepaid burner phone. The software showed the two signals, Sarah's and the ghost phone, pinging the tower in concert, moving together, away from the trailhead, deeper into the forest's embrace. For a few crucial minutes, they were in sync. And then, Sarah's signal vanished forever. The analyst leaned back, the silence of the room broken by his sharp intake of breath. He picked up the phone to call Detective Miller. The cold case had just caught fire. The ghost phone was a dead end in itself, unregistered and discarded. But the digital forensics team didn't stop there. They traced the phone's purchase to a gas station 2 towns over, paid for in cash 2 weeks before Sarah disappeared. There was no video footage, but they could trace its activation signal. And from there, they began the laborious process of cross-referencing its location data. Over the 2 weeks, it was active with the signals of other known phones in the area. They were looking for a digital companion, a phone that was consistently in the same place at the same time as the burner. After days of analysis, they found a match. The burner phone, it turned out, often traveled in perfect tandem with another device, one registered to a 55-year-old local handyman. His name was Robert Evans. Everyone in Silver Creek knew Bob. He was a quiet man, unassuming, the kind of person who fades into the background. He'd lived in town his whole life, married for 30 years, with 2 grown children. He was reliable, affordable, the guy you called to fix a leaky faucet or patch a roof. He had no criminal record. He was utterly, terrifyingly normal. A quick check of old work orders from Sarah's landlord revealed that Bob Evans had been hired to do some minor plumbing work at her rented cottage just 1 month before she vanished. He had never been on the initial suspect list. He was a face in the crowd, a man hiding in plain sight. The unmarked police car rolled to a stop across the street from a modest, well-kept home with a neatly trimmed lawn and cheerful flower beds. This was the home of Robert "Bob" Evans. Detective Miller sat in the passenger seat, watching the house, a knot tightening in his stomach. For 3 years, Sarah's killer had been a faceless monster, a phantom of the woods. Now that phantom might be a man who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and waved to his neighbors. Miller and his partner walked up the concrete path. The air was still. A dog barked in a neighboring yard. When they knocked, the door was answered by Evan's wife, a pleasant-looking woman who smiled with weary confusion. Behind her, Bob Evans appeared, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was a mask of placid curiosity. When Detective Miller introduced himself and asked if they could speak with him down at the station about an old case, Evans' expression didn't flicker. He simply nodded, said he'd be happy to help, and told his wife he'd be back in a little while. There was no panic, no fear, just a quiet compliance that was more chilling than any protest. As he sat in the back of the car, watching his perfect little life recede in the rearview mirror, Bob Evans looked not like a monster, but like a man on his way to run an errand. The interrogation room was small, gray, and smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was a place designed for discomfort, a place where secrets came to die. For the first 2 hours, Bob Evans was a portrait of calm denial. He sat with his hands folded on the metal table, his voice even and steady, as he recounted his version of October 14th, 2021. He'd been sick that day, he claimed. A bad flu. He hadn't left the house. He barely knew Sarah Jenkins, remembered her only as the nice young woman whose sink he'd fixed. He was polite, helpful, and utterly convincing. But Detective Miller was patient. He let the silence in the room stretch, letting the weight of the unspoken hang in the air. Then he calmly laid a file on the table. He didn't open it. He just let it sit there. He started talking about cell phone towers, about digital footprints, about a burner phone that moved in perfect lockstep with Bob's registered phone. He spoke about the gas station where the burner was purchased, and the work records that showed Bob had been working a job in that town on that day. Evan's composure began to fray. A small tick started in his eye. He shifted in his chair. He started to bluster, his voice losing its steady calm, rising in pitch. The wall of normalcy he had so carefully constructed for 3 years was beginning to crumble, brick by brick. The turning point in the interrogation came without a shout, without a dramatic outburst. It came with a sigh, a long, shuddering sigh of resignation from Bob Evans. The fight had gone out of him. Detective Miller pushed a single photograph across the table. It was the last picture of Sarah, the one from the missing posters, her face full of light and life. Evans stared at it, and for the first time, a flicker of something remorse, or perhaps just self-pity, crossed his face. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a near whisper, thin and reedy. He began to talk. He said he had seen her on the trail that day by chance. He'd recognized her from the plumbing job. He said he'd only meant to talk to her, that he found her attractive. He made an advance, he admitted, and she had rejected him, threatened to tell his wife. He said he panicked. There was a struggle, an accident. He used that word, accident, over and over, a desperate mantra. He said she fell and hit her head. He didn't know what to do. He was scared, so he hid her. He buried her body deep in the national forest, in a place no one would ever find. He wept then, not for Sarah, but for himself, for the quiet, simple life he had just confessed to destroying. In the sterile gray room, the ugly, pathetic truth had finally emerged, not with a roar, but with a pathetic, whimpering confession. The news of Bob Evans' arrest ripped through Silver Creek like a shockwave. This was a small town, a place where people believed they knew their neighbors. The idea that a monster had been living among them, hiding behind a facade of quiet helpfulness, was incomprehensible. Friends who had hired Evans to work in their homes felt a retroactive chill, replaying every mundane conversation, every polite smile, searching for a sign they had missed. The local diner buzzed with hushed, horrified conversations. How could the man who fixed their screen doors be capable of such a thing? For Sarah's parents, the news brought a fresh wave of agony. Their grief, a constant, dull ache for 3 years, was sharpened into a new, piercing pain. They now had a face to attach to their daughter's absence, but it was the face of a man they had likely passed in the grocery store. The relief of having an answer was irrevocably tangled with the horror of the truth. The community's shock soon gave way to a somber, collective grief for Sarah, a young woman whose light had been extinguished by a moment of pathetic, brutal violence. The trial of the people versus Robert Evans was not a mystery. The prosecution's case was built on two unshakable pillars: the cold, hard science of the digital evidence and the defendant's own words captured on the recording of his confession. In the hushed, wood-paneled courtroom, the prosecutor laid out the narrative, his voice resonating with quiet authority. He painted a picture of Sarah Jenkins, her life full of promise. And then he painted a picture of Bob Evans, a predator hiding in plain sight, his obsession festering behind a mask of normalcy. On a large screen, the jury watched the digital ghosts of Sarah and Bob's phones move in their final, fatal dance. They heard the audio of the interrogation, Evans' voice filling the courtroom as he calmly constructed his lies. And then, as he finally, pitifully, broke. The defense attorney argued that the confession was coerced, that the death was a tragic accident, a moment of panic, not a malicious act. He portrayed Evans as a simple man who made a terrible mistake. But Evans himself sat at the defense table, impassive, a gray man in an ill-fitting suit, seemingly disconnected from the gravity of the proceedings. He was a void, an absence of emotion, just as he had created a permanent absence in the lives of all who loved Sarah. The final day of the trial was heavy with anticipation. The jury had been out for less than 6 hours. When they filed back into the jury box, their faces were grim, their eyes fixed forward, deliberately avoiding the gaze of the defendant. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, holding hands, their bodies rigid with tension. The court clerk took the verdict form from the foreman. The room was utterly silent. The only sound the rustling of that single fateful piece of paper. The clerk cleared his throat and read the verdict. On the charge of murder in the second degree, we the jury find the defendant, Robert Evans, guilty. A collective, shuddering gasp went through the courtroom. Sarah's mother collapsed into her husband's arms, her silent tears finally giving way to deep, wrenching sobs. It was a moment of justice, a moment of accountability. But as Robert Evans was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his face remained a blank slate. There was no remorse, no flicker of emotion. The verdict was a resolution, but it was not an end to the pain. Justice is a complicated word. For the state, it was a conviction and a sentence. 25 years to life for Robert Evans. But for the family of Sarah Jenkins, justice felt incomplete, a hollow victory. In the years following his trial, Evans refused to cooperate further. He held the one last piece of information that Sarah's family desperately needed, the one thing that would allow them to truly lay her to rest. He would not tell them where he had buried her. The Whispering Pines Trail is quiet again. The search teams are long gone. Hikers walk the path, breathing the clean mountain air, admiring the vistas, unaware that somewhere, deep within the vast, silent wilderness that surrounds them, lies a secret. For Sarah's parents, there is no final resting place to visit, no headstone to adorn with flowers. Their daughter's only memorial is the art she left behind. Her paintings, once vibrant captures of the world she loved, now hang as a poignant, beautiful testament to a life of brilliant color, a life that ended far too soon in the deep, dark silence of the woods.